Hi, my name is Khalil Cumberbatch, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Policy at the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy at the Fortune Society, and welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the criminal justice system from various perspectives, including those most impacted by the criminal justice system. We discuss critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone that is affected by it. We ask you, the viewers, to spread the word about Both Sides of the Bars and share your comments with us on Twitter at TheFortuneSOC and at LegalAidNYC. Today's show is titled Immigration and Criminal Law, a Nexus of Perpetual Punishment. My guest today is Casey Dalporto, an attorney from the Legal Aid Society specializing in immigration and criminal law. Since November 2016, she has worked as a criminal immigration specialist in the Bronx Legal Aid Office. Thank you for joining us, Casey.
Thank you.
Almost from the very beginning of his campaign trail and leading right into his term, the current president has messaged anti-immigrant rhetoric and action. The current administration has touted the building of a wall, attempted to implement travel bans, and separated migrant children from their parents. However, the current immigration detention and deportation machine was not built by the current administration. Let's not forget that it was the previous administration that has deported more people than all of the previous administrations combined. Yet currently, there are trends that are reflective of a different focus for the current administration. So Casey, what are some of those trends that you see?
So we see a spike in enforcement in the interior. So when we think of immigration, there's immigration enforcement at the border, which is Border Patrol, and then immigration enforcement in the interior, like within the walls of the United States, so to speak. And that's usually left to ICE.
And ICE stands for?
Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So they're sort of like the immigration police. And they have kind of broad discretion on who they target. And that's essentially left up to the head of the Department of Homeland Security, who currently is Kirstjen Nielsen, and before that was John Kelly, who's now the president's aide. So it's really their enforcement priorities are coming from the very, very top of our government. Are really coming straight from the president. So under the Obama administration, you know, when Obama first came into office, there was, as you mentioned, a huge surge in deportations and a huge spike in interior enforcement and border enforcement. As the administration sort of found their footing in terms of immigration enforcement, they started to really hone their focus. And so rather than just executing a huge dragnet and you know, raiding, you know, farms or restaurants, they started to really hone in on the types of targets, the types of individuals that they wanted to deport. And so what you saw about halfway through the Obama administration was that ICE released what they called a priority enforcement system, which categorized people into 3 different priority categories. There was the highest priority, and those were people with serious felony convictions. There was a level 2 priority, which were people with what they deemed serious misdemeanor convictions, and then there was a level 3 low priority, and those were people who had non-serious misdemeanor convictions or no criminal record whatsoever. And the instructions coming from Obama were to divert all of their resources to targeting the people in the top priority primarily. So the people who, you know, most people would expect you to be focusing on, people who were violent, who had violent felony convictions, who were known terrorists. And that, especially near the end of the Obama administration, was almost exclusively who ICE was focused on deporting. In fact, 90% had serious criminal convictions.
And those criminal convictions, if I can just ask a clarifying question, those criminal convictions could have been 1 year prior to them being picked up by ICE, or it could have been 30 years prior to them being picked up by ICE. And once a person was in the system, what level of evidence could they present to show that a person has somehow changed their life from the time that they were convicted of a crime to the time that immigration came and picked them up?
So that actually raises a really good point about another difference between the Obama administration enforcement scheme and the Trump administration. So Obama had this 3-tier system. And in addition to that, everybody who was deportable could apply for what they called prosecutorial discretion.
Mm-hmm.
So prosecutorial discretion is when you say, okay, yeah, you can deport me. I have no legal recourse here. I have no legal options to fight my deportation. But look at all the good I've done. I had this serious violent felony, say I was involved in a robbery or something in the 80s or 90s. But since then, I have kids, I have grandkids, I'm working. I've established a whole life here. I'm a business owner. I'm church going. And so you could submit these applications to ICE agents or ICE prosecutors, and they had the discretion, or they were really empowered with this discretion to say, okay, on a case-by-case basis, if there are extremely mitigating circumstances, we're not going to cause undue hardship on these people's lives and their families and their communities and everyone who relies on them, Americans who rely on this person. And so prosecutorial discretion was really encouraged, especially for people who were considered in the lowest priority, the category 3s, who had no criminal history. But also in exceptional cases, the Obama administration granted prosecutorial discretion for people who even fell in the highest targeted priorities. So when Trump came into office, immediately he rescinded that whole system. He heavily curtailed the exercise of prosecutorial discretion, and he also just wiped out the whole priority system altogether, and replaced it with a no priority system. The memo from John Kelly that was issued around the same time as the travel ban, so it kind of got overshadowed. It said everyone's a priority. It doesn't matter what your circumstances are. If you're here and you don't have legal cover to be here, meaning if you don't have any legal status, we will deport you. We will go after you. No one is safe. And so that's really that's how it is right now. And every once in a while, we'll hear some tweets from the president or from Jeff Sessions or Kirstjen Nielsen, who's now the head of the Department of Homeland Security, who says, but even though we could deport anybody legally, we really focus on the criminal aliens. They call criminal aliens. Statistically, that doesn't actually bear out. They don't focus on people exclusively with criminal convictions or even serious criminal convictions. There's been a huge spike in arrests and deportation of people who have no criminal record whatsoever.
And those folks could be, I would assume, those are folks who are largely undocumented. And so that's the reason that they're justifying to go after them, is that someone is here undocumented, whether they have involvement with the criminal justice system or not. The mere fact that you are undocumented makes you eligible to be arrested and detained and potentially deported by ICE.
Right, and so undocumented can mean a lot of things. It could mean that you crossed the border from Mexico. It could mean that you came here on a visitor visa from Eastern Europe or something decades ago and you overstayed your visa. It could mean that you once had DACA and now you don't. It also, for almost 800,000 people, it now means that you once had TPS, which stands for Temporary Protective Status. It was another form of humanitarian relief for people who came from countries that were unfit to be deported to, but who are now getting deported to those places.
Got it. And so is it fair to say that the previous administration had a very keen focus on, as you said, people that were that had involvement in the criminal justice system, but also had serious criminal convictions, whether they were documented or not? And now the current administration, as you mentioned, has a wide dragnet that they say everyone's a priority, but the reality is that people who are here undocumented, the various, keeping in mind the various examples that you gave, that seems to be their priority? And if so, what is based on your experience with working with folks like this, what is the feel in those communities of having this system feeling like it is constantly scanning and looking for people who are here undocumented?
Yeah. Well, I hesitate to say that anyone's really a priority under the current enforcement scheme. They certainly haven't disclosed any priority system or any methodology to who they choose to target and why. You know, the immigration advocate organizations within New York City Legal Aid Society, the Immigrant Defense Project, the Bronx Defenders, Brooklyn Defenders, we all meet every month and we sort of huddle and talk about our own anecdotal experiences, about who's being targeted, who's getting arrested, which of our clients have been picked up. And we've all just, we have spreadsheets of the information, and we've been trying to discern some kind of pattern, some kind of intelligible logic to who they're targeting, and we really can't figure it out. So, despite what their line, the public line is about, that they're only targeting criminal, what they call criminal aliens, that's actually not. Our statistics don't reflect that at all. It does reflect that they are targeting undocumented individuals with no record, people who have never been arrested before, or people who are extremely vulnerable. Like we've seen targeting of our victims of human trafficking, for example, and victims of domestic violence. So it seems that no class of undocumented people is exempt. And what does that do? It feels random, and that's terrifying. That means that you're living under a culture of panic and paranoia and terror. It's been really hard on the immigrant community as well as all New Yorkers. I can speak for the Bronx community. And the larger New York City community, and there's just been a lot of fear.
Yeah, and so tell me a little bit about now moving from national to more local. Tell me a little bit about Legal Aid and some other organizations' effort to get ICE to not be allowed into courthouses, and why is that important? Some people hear that and they say, well, ICE has discretion to go wherever they want, and if they are allowed to go into the courthouses, then why not go into the courthouses, right? That the assumption is that they are going after folks who are facing criminal charges, but the reality is quite different, right? Can you explain to the viewers?
Sure. So just to give you some context, historically, ICE under previous administrations has sort of self-imposed restricted areas that they call sensitive locations. And these are sort of off limits for ICE enforcement. And so it includes churches, hospitals, schools. And so under previous administrations, ICE has said, we're not gonna go to those locations. And courthouses were sort of on that list as well. That was sort of a gray area. They reserved the right to go to courthouses, but largely they abstained from going to courthouses. And that is because courthouses are an institution of justice, and they really are like the pillar of our democracy, and they have all of these sorts of really highly esteemed values about, the pursuit of justice, and that everyone should go and feel safe. It's should be a sacrosanct place. And the same way that kind of churches or hospitals or schools should be as well. So under the Trump administration, they have not followed the sensitive locations policy, and so you have seen an increased enforcement in churches, in schools, in hospitals, and to a great extent in courthouses. So there's been a huge surge. Internally, we've been collecting our own data. The Immigrant Defense Project, Legal Aid Society, and the other public defender organizations have just been tracking our own experiences, and we've found a 1,200% increase under the Trump administration. So,
1,200% increase under the current administration in terms of
arrests made in the courthouses.
Wow.
Right.
So 1,200% increase
Yes.
in arrests in courthouses.
Right. And so it used to be like sort of a safe space, and now it's just become like a feeding ground for ICE enforcement. ICE agents are in our hallways patrolling, trolling, stalking our clients. Every week they come to the Bronx Hall of Justice. They come to every other courthouse in the city. And you know, they argue that it is legal. We argue that it's not. Right now, we are proposing a bill that's currently pending in the New York State Legislature to ban ICE from court. And that would codify or create into actual statute or actual law what we believe is a longstanding legal precedent for prohibiting civil arrests in courthouse facilities. And for that, the reason that I mentioned earlier, because courthouses are historically really should be upheld as like the highest ideal of our government and should be protected.
And based on your internal research and just conversations you've had with the other defender organizations, the type of folks that are being apprehended by ICE, why are those folks in the criminal courthouse in the first place?
So, you know, there's a lot of reasons that you could be in the courthouse. You could be a victim, you could be a witness, you could be a criminal defendant. Almost all of the people that have been targeted in New York City courthouses who were defendants were charged with very low-level offenses, only misdemeanor offenses, almost exclusively. So you hear things like driving with a suspended license, drunk driving, petty larceny, you know, misdemeanor assault for people who get into a fight on a bus. Yeah, and oftentimes those cases end up getting dismissed. And that's the natural course of a criminal case in New York City, you know? Someone makes a complaint and the facts don't bear it out, there's no evidence, the prosecution can't make out their case, and the case goes away. Yet, you know, and that's part of our justice system. Like, you're presumed innocent until you're proven guilty, and if they can't prove you're guilty, then you're innocent under the eyes of the law. And unfortunately, that doesn't seem to matter to ICE. So we've had a lot of clients who go in for their court dates, and even after the case gets dismissed on the record, ICE still ambushes them and arrests them.
Wow.
And you also see a lot of clients, you know, I mentioned earlier, victims of trafficking. We've had, you know, one of the great achievements of the Legal Aid Society in collaboration with the Office of Court Administration and the prosecutor's offices is that we've created these specialized parts for human trafficking. And we've sort of come to understand that these, you know, prostitution-based offenses are really kind of blaming the victim. And so we're trying to divert these individuals out of the criminal justice system and into these programs that will help, that sees them more as, you know, victims caught in this exploitation system. And ironically, those individuals also, if they are undocumented, Congress has created special pathways to status for those vulnerable populations, for victims of trafficking, for victims of domestic violence, for victims of serious crimes. And these are all people that are coming to court kind of hoping to learn about these programs and get help, and en route they get intercepted by ICE.
You mentioned the bill that is in the New York State Legislature, and so are there similar bills in other states that have passed, and if so, have they worked to keep ICE out of courthouses?
There have been several states where the states have taken legal action either through an official order from the Office of Court Administration or a governor or mayor. So for example, California, Colorado, New Jersey, there are a number of states, and the number is growing, of states that have signaled to ICE legally or publicly, we don't want you stalking our clients and exploiting our courthouses as your, you know, trap for undocumented people. And it also creates a chaotic environment. And so taking that into consideration, several states have taken measures to ban ICE. So we're just, hoping that New York will fall in line. New York has always been a leader for the immigrant community. We are a city and state built of immigrants. And, so even though New York is a sanctuary city, we want the state to reflect that and make our, protect our courts.
And so that raises a good point that kind of transitions into my next question. People hear this term sanctuary city, right? And they think in very traditional sense of what the word sanctuary means, right? But here we're hearing that not only in New York City, but also in major metropolitan cities across the country, that sanctuary doesn't actually mean what I would assume most folks thinks that it means, which is that someone can be living in this city, undocumented, maybe even has had a order of removal against them and have no fear of being apprehended by ICE. What is the reality?
Well, I mean, to some extent, we are a sanctuary city, and that's something that immigrant advocates like the Legal Aid Society, like Make the Road, like the Immigrant Defense Project, take great pride in, because we have passed a number of laws and executive orders over the past decade, especially under the Obama administration, to protect New Yorkers. And so now we have certain measures in place so that, for example, no city employees and no state employees are allowed to cooperate with ICE to in ICE enforcement operations, which means that, if you go to a hospital, let's say it's a city hospital, let's say you go to Bellevue's not allowed to call ICE on you. The same goes for any other city employee or state employee. So that's been a really excellent development, and it's really changed the lives of many immigrants in the city. Unfortunately, it can't protect you completely. If you're a deportable person living in New York City, the reality is that, if you're in public, ICE can find you. And so, we've done as much as we can sort of within the confines of the law, and we still have a long way to go, including hopefully the passage of this bill that's currently pending in the state legislature, which would at least close off that channel for ICE arrests in courthouses. But it also reflects the spirit, I think, of the city. There's a lot of anti-immigrant hostility that has sprung up or sort of been exercised under the Trump administration. And we want to send a message to our immigrant community that we're here with you and we stand by you, and we recognize the assault on your liberties and your sense of safety that you're experiencing, and we're doing everything that we can to make that easier.
In the last few minutes that we have, I would love to talk a little bit about a case recently that has garnered, for rightfully so, for valid reasons, national attention. Pizza delivery man, a father named Pablo Villavicencio. Was working and was attempting to do his job and deliver a pizza to an army base in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, and was ultimately, by the end of the night, ended up in ICE custody. How does that happen, and what is happening with his case, and how is this all too often not an uncommon act to actually happen?
Right. So Pablo is a client of the Legal Aid Society. What's happening in his case currently is that we were able to get a stay of removal, which means that literally 15-20 minutes before he was set to be put on a plane back to Mexico, we ended up persuading a federal judge to block his deportation, at least until July 20th, so that we can explore avenues for relief. And we can talk about those avenues in a second, but what it really reflects, I think, is the point that I was saying earlier, which is that there's just been so much anti-immigrant hostility, and it's a very ugly, vicious climate. in terms of just like the culture in the public. And I think the Trump administration has really kind of endorsed that kind of hatred and vitriol. And, so you have people, New Yorkers turning on New Yorkers.
Yeah.
And that's what happened here. So I think, he came to the Army base to deliver a pizza. It's my understanding that the guard who checked him in wasn't a law enforcement officer at all, was actually just a civilian who took it upon himself to report him to ICE.
Wow.
And we do, I have to say, I have anecdotally heard of that a lot. Like there's a lot of paranoia that our clients are afraid that, old grudges are going to report them to ICE, or that, their ex-girlfriends or ex-boyfriends are going to call ICE on them, or landlords that they don't get along with are going to extort money from them, or else turn them over to ICE. And so that's been sort of an unfortunate turn in the culture. It's just been that, I think the immigrant community feels afraid that even apart from ICE officers who are supposed to be looking for them, that they may be targeted by anyone.
Yeah. And so in the last 30 seconds that we have, what is something that our viewers can do to help support Pablo's case?
So for Pablo, I would sign a petition. So right now we're collecting signatures to present to the ICE field officer director for New York City to try to persuade him to exercise some prosecutorial discretion. As I said earlier, that program has almost completely been curtailed under Trump, but we think that this is an exceptionally sympathetic case. His name is Thomas Homan, and he does have the authority to exercise prosecutorial discretion. So you can go to our Twitter handle or the Make the Road Twitter handle, and we have a petition up. The second thing would be to find your local assemblyman, find your local senator, call them, and tell them that you support any program that strengthens the sanctuary city spirit or the sanctuary state spirit, including the Protect Our Courts bill, which is the bill that I've been mentioning to keep ICE out of the courthouses.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us
You're
today,
welcome.
and
Thank
you
you
for giving us your insight and your expertise. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, please check us out on the web at fortunesociety.org or on Facebook by typing in The Fortune Society. This is Khalil Cumberbatch, and I appreciate you joining us as we critically look at both sides of the bars.